real quick something.
Great.
First of all, thank y'all. I appreciate nobody hanging up right now. Obviously, I'm not I'm not Dr. Fawcett because our hair is a different color. But otherwise, we're
And
very
he's a foot
much the
and a
same.
half taller.
And oh yes, yeah, he's a lot taller than me.
You can't
But
see that
anyway,
online, but the man is tall.
he's very tall and I'm short, so we work out well together. I would say that. Um, I'm a licensed professional counselor, mental health supervisor, specialist. I am also a CSAT supervisor, trauma therapist, grief and loss therapist, couples, individuals, families. Um, I, Usually, what I really tell people is I'm older, and therefore, over the years, you accumulate the things that you really believe go together and how you can best help people and serve them. So as I get older, that is my goal, to keep doing that and keep things interested. So I have worked with men in a men's program, which is what I do today. I've also created and run a female program. And yes, the same type of topics, the same everything, the same issues. One is very much partners and spouses of anybody that is currently working with sex, love, or relationship issues. They're usually traumatized. They're usually scared, sad, angry, everything you can imagine because they have been lied to, they have been cheated on, they don't know what's up or down. They usually what we talk about is I love you, I hate you, because they do love you and they do care and they do want to be with the people that they love, but they don't know how to trust anymore. One of the things that actually came up for us today was just a section in the Sex 101 book. Scott was about triggers for not just relapse, but triggers for acting out. And you will hear many times, well, there was abuse that went on. There might have been sexual abuse, physical abuse, emotional abuse, mental abuse, somewhere as a child, somewhere growing up, bullying. Then you get into those issues underneath it, rejection, abandonment, and then what are the triggers as I get older, and why do I turn around and act out when I've been trying so hard? Like I see every single day is I get to see men or women that are really working hard to change their lives. They can be triggered because they're frustrated, because they're angry, because they're sad, because they're lonely, because they're not proud of who they are as a human being. There's a lot of shame and guilt. And I just want to encourage anybody out there that's listening or participating today is to remember that it's not that we are bad people. It's because there's behaviors and things that have happened that we have done that there's a lot of shame and guilt and remorse around that. And the clients that I'm fortunate enough to work with are people that are really trying to come up out of that and to save themselves, to save their marriage, to save their children, and to realize that this is not a path that they originally chose to walk. It was a path that they can now make the decision not to continue to walk. And I believe in that with all of my heart. And I have personally been on both sides of this. So I can speak to, being one of the partners and spouses and knowing what that's like and how scary that is. So that's just what I wanted to throw out there. And it's pretty interesting because that checklist is so spot on with what are the feelings that may come up or what are the things that may trigger someone to act out, and how can we help people learn not to. So there you go.
Thank you, Karen. Was that the workbook or this that you were talking about?
This was in the workbook?
Yeah,
yes.
The Sex Addiction 101 workbook. There's an exercise about triggers in there that is for, it's created for addicts to look at their triggers to figure out, what are the things that push me toward acting out? But triggers are something that occurs for every person. Addicts, betrayed partners, normies, you know, there are 3 normies on the planet, and even they get triggered. You know, we all have issues, and, you know, you can call it whatever you want, pushing buttons, things like that. You know, somebody's going to push a button somewhere. And usually I find the people who installed the button in the first place, like parents and spouses and things, they're the ones who really know how to push the button.
Yes, they do. I call it poking the bear.
Yes, yeah.
Just do not poke the bear.
Yeah, poking the bear, you know, rip the scab off, whatever you want to call it. It happens to everybody. So, yeah, I like that you kind of drew that parallel with betrayed partners there.
Yes.
So ask us questions, use the Q&A feature or the chat feature, preferably the Q&A feature. We've got one in already, so we will hop right to it. Background, hi to the asker of this question. I think I know who you are, and you were supposed to call me. I hope you still have my phone number. I am 57, gay, single, addicted to porn, which is primary acting out method. I started coming to drop-in groups about a year ago, so I consider that to be my start of serious recovery. However, my bottom line has not changed much over the year, and I rarely have 2 days in a row of sobriety. Today I was on a phone call with a recovery friend, good for you. He asked me, are you happier now than you were a year ago when you started recovery? I really don't think I am. So the question here is, how do you know if you're progressing in recovery? How can it be measured? By what yardstick can or should it be measured? Very good question.
Very good question. And how much time has been put together? Was on that question?
He says he rarely gets more than a couple of days.
Gotcha.
But he's been coming to meetings here, and I think he's doing some meetings locally if this is the person I'm thinking.
Right. And I'm going to ask you to also step in on this one, Scott. Recovery takes time. Recovery takes dedication. We always talk about pursue your recovery as much as you did your addiction. It's not something that just started and stopped in a few days. It's something that's gone on maybe for somebody's whole life. So if your commitment is to your recovery and you are following what's been laid out by your mentors, your sponsors, your therapists, your whatever, and that's to connect with sober, clean people, to work with guidance from therapists and sponsors especially, connect with one another so that you can talk about what is going on with you. It seems like a huge list, but if it's a daily practice of doing that, then the chance for recovery grows and grows and grows stronger each day. I'm fortunate enough to see the miracles that happen when someone comes in and they're like already in a week, there's something different. There's something that's alive. But when people leave, you've got to continue that, to continue moving on. And again, connection, talking to somebody, telling them what's going on, what are you thinking, what are your triggers, what's happening. That's, to me, that's the route to go at all. And Scott, I know you want to add to that one.
You know, I'll talk about my story a little bit, and then I'll pick out some specific stuff from this question. I came into recovery in 2000. My sobriety date for sex addiction is 2002, and my sobriety date for substance abuse is 2004. So I did not get it right away. I'm glad I kept coming back. You know, I am an alcoholic, a drug addict, and a sex addict. And I would get a little bit of time from sex addiction, but I'd be drinking like a fish. And I'd feel bad about drinking, so I'd start smoking dope. Then I'd feel bad about that, so I'd go back to the sex. And it was just, it was a spinning door. You know, Dr. Rob, I knew him back then, and he told me I was changing seats on the Titanic. You know, the view is a little different every time, but the ship is still going down. Was the point he was making, and he was right. I had to crash and burn pretty badly. And even then, I wasn't ready to give up all of my addictions. And, you know, my recovery for the first several years was 2 steps forward, and sometimes it was 2.5 steps backward, or sometimes it was 1.5 steps backward. It just felt like I was treading water for the longest time. And in some ways, my life got worse, not better, for the first year or two, because consequences were coming home to roost, and I didn't really have my full-blown addiction to use for escape. You know, it was only when I was utterly miserable that I would turn to it, which was every couple of days, by the way. So you're not alone with this experience. You know, what I will tell you is that in retrospect, my life was getting slowly but steadily better. It was just very hard to see at the time. And the one thing I want to pull out of your question is, today I was on a phone call with the recovery friend. He asked me a very serious question and a personal question. Are you happier now than you were a year ago? If somebody asks you a serious personal question, it's because they care about you. Was any, you know, I'll just throw this out. Was anybody asking you serious personal questions before you got into recovery? I'm guessing the answer is no. At least it was for me. I mean, maybe they were, but I sure as hell wasn't answering in any kind of an honest way. And, you know, you were able to answer in an honest way. That's the beginnings of vulnerability and intimacy. And for a sex addict and a porn addict, that is hugely progress, even if it doesn't feel that way. So yeah, I mean, what yardstick can or should you measure your recovery? I don't know. I don't know.
I don't have a yardstick to measure it.
Yeah.
What I look for is, as corny as it may sound, is, can I look in the mirror and can I see myself, and can I in that day be proud of the person that I am? Because in my lifetime, that was not something. It was not anything that I could even dream of doing. But it's that's where the peace comes from, and that's over time. It's not an easy process, but as you keep going through it, it's like year after year, there's something else that just shows up, and you're like, I would have missed it. I would have missed all the things. I would have missed my family and my kids and my grandkids, and nothing is worth losing all of that. And I think most people that I work with that are in recovery will always have their story of what made the difference. And maybe the answer is, don't measure it. Just feel it and live it inside, and know that today you're in recovery, and don't try to measure it.
Yeah, one of the things I often tell people is recovery is not a destination, it's a journey.
Yes, it is.
We need to stop worrying about where we're going, and we need to start enjoying the journey, and we'll get there when we get there. And the ability to do that has made my life a lot more fun, because I'm not trying to get anywhere anymore.
Right.
I'm just trying to do life a little better today than I did it yesterday. And usually I succeed, not always. So,
I agree, Scott. And recovery can be fun.
yeah.
It's not this, doesn't have to be this dull, horrible thing. Actually, I think we try to make it fun. It's okay to laugh. It's okay to do all those things that maybe you haven't had a chance to do unless you were high or buzzed or acting out or whatever it was. It can be fun. And I think that's what keeps us there too.
Yeah. And anybody who's feeling this way, I'm so glad you're here, because you're still trudging the road of happy destiny. I mean, there's a reading in AA where they talk about trudging the road of happy destiny, and they mean that as a positive, even though they use the word trudging. And yeah, I mean, trudging the path to recovery is what we do sometimes. We just have to slog forward through the mud and the muck.
I agree.
Yeah, hang in there.
Right.
Okay, I've noticed for myself, one of my triggers is jealousy.
Wow.
What are your thoughts on this emotion and how it plays into chemsex addiction, or really any addiction, I would think?
Jealousy. That's a tough one. I think that's a very deep human emotion to have, especially if you were raised in an environment of being compared to or judged, or maybe you're in that environment now. And so um, it's always about, I'm not, I'm less than somebody else. Therefore, I'm jealous of this person. Maybe that person's not happy and we don't know. But I really believe it's rooted in how you were raised and if you were judged and treated bad, or you've been abused in your lifetime. And why didn't somebody else get abused? Why didn't my brother get abused or something like that? I also believe that sometimes it's what we were talking about. People become jealous of other people that are happy because we're so miserable. And so why can't I be happy? Well, if we're talking about addictions and things such as that, is you're never going to find happiness in an addiction. It's going to be a fleeting moment or a fleeting time. You're going to find happiness in recovery, and that's what you keep in your heart. So yeah, jealousy and anger, they go together really well. But you have to get underneath that and find out why. What do you believe that other person has that you don't have, or what characteristic or anything? Worst thing we can do is compare one another's looks, compare money, compare all these things. And bottom line, for me, it's being alive is what I'm happy about. But yes, I've been somebody that's been jealous of other people in my lifetime. I just choose not to go there anymore. So what about you?
Any strong emotion is a trigger. Even good emotions can be a trigger. If I have a negative emotion, I lose my job, I feel shame and anger and whatever, I want to go act out. If tomorrow I get a great new job that's better than the job I just lost, I feel great and I want to go act out. That's the nature of addiction. We don't handle emotions very well, and even good stuff is difficult for an addict to feel. If somebody complimented me when I was in my addiction, it freaked me out, and I would go act out over a compliment. So jealousy, that's a strong emotion. That's a trigger for any addiction: chemsex, sex, alcohol, drugs, gambling. Yeah.
One of the things we talk about a lot is there's so many people that can give love, that can show up and take care of one another, that codependence aspect of things, but it's extremely difficult to allow yourself to receive love. So it's like having a wall, and that's usually fear of, how do I take in? That's a compliment, that somebody receives, or that, wow, you're an amazing man, Scott. And it's like, okay, I can't take that in, so I've got to go run away from it. And I think it's fear of receiving, because a lot of people have been rejected so many times in their lives. I don't want to believe that I could be important to someone.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, there's so much shame with me even today that it's hard to hear a compliment. Okay. I found myself astonishingly triggered watching a TV show the other night. It had nothing to do with sex or the experiences I've had in the past that directly relate to my addictive behavior. On screen, a couple was talking about entering into illegal activity that would reward them greatly financially. They went back and forth negotiating whether they could violate their ethical boundaries to do it. They slowly rationalized in their way into deciding to go ahead. And as I watched and listened, I became aroused, and the feeling was the same that I went through as I rationalized the decisions that led me to acting out and lying. It was amazingly powerful. I have to be grateful that I didn't end up going further and moving toward acting out. What are the best tools for acknowledging this trigger without feeling guilty about my reaction to it? Interesting question.
That's an amazing question. What a great way to put it. I believe the arousal, the intensity. So when you're plotting and planning and scheming on doing anything, the intensity is going up and going up. Probably even music in a movie is going up. So all of that is surrounding it, very much like acting out sexually. In the planning process, the cycle or the addictive pattern is there's a step 1, 2, 3, 4, whatever, how many steps you have. And it's more and more arousing as you're going around that circle for that cycle of addiction to pass. And that sounds like what was probably going on here is that intensity of plotting and planning. What we do in the sexual aspect of things is replace intimacy with intensity. So it's a lot more fun and a lot faster if I'm doing something intense than it is if I'm trying to become intimate with someone and I'm petrified and not sure of who I am myself. So that's how I believe it sounds like it related there.
Yeah, a couple of weeks ago, I was having a bad day, and I was chatting on the phone with a friend of mine who's a therapist on the East Coast, and she was also having a bad day. And we were trying to figure out why we were having a bad day. That wasn't the purpose of our call, but since we were both in it, and she said, you know what? It feels like I haven't felt this way since I was in it. And she's a betrayed partner, so she meant her bad relationship and struggling with that. And for me, I said, oh my God, that's right. It felt like I was in my addiction. Now, neither of us are in that situation right now, but it felt that way. And we realized because we're both stuck at home with no choices, and it was like, oh, I haven't been stuck with no choices since I was an active addict. And she hadn't felt stuck with no choices since she was in a horrible relationship with a non-recovering sex addict. And it was triggering to both of us, even though it had nothing to do with, reality. We both felt triggered. She felt triggered toward being, acting out emotionally, and I felt triggered toward my addiction. And it's amazing what will trigger us. The other point I wanted to make was, particularly with TV, and Tim Stein, who's another therapist, he does some stuff for sex and relationship healing. He calls it not porn. It's not porn, but it's triggering like porn. And usually it's, some sexy actor or actress walks across the screen and we think, or somebody's not wearing enough clothes, and we think, and we'll watch a TV show because we've got a crush on somebody. It's not porn, but it's doing the same thing as porn. So, but this extends it to a situation. It's like somebody is scheming and lying and justifying.
Yeah.
And they're in denial of, and tamping down their own best judgment. And boy, does that feel like addiction, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does.
So the question was, what are the best tools for acknowledging this trigger without feeling guilty about my reaction to it? I think you just did. You brought it up in a public setting.
Right.
Any thoughts on that, Karen?
And I just added on is for anyone out there that wants to know what recovery is about, this is exactly what it's about. Is when you're feeling something and you know that I don't want to feel that, you say it out loud to somebody. It doesn't have to be your best bud. It can be, we're just all here on the phone together or on the screen together talking, and you admitted what came up for you. That frees you up. And that's what recovery is about. It's just telling the truth and connecting with other human beings. And in this day and time, we know that's really hard right now. So we can't go into meeting rooms and stuff like that. So this is an amazing alternative to be able to have that. So whoever that came from, congratulations. You just practice recovery.
Yeah. Let's see, I think it's amazing that Scott was able to make it through all those ups and downs of recovery. Well, thank you. Very helpful to hear such a real example. That's why I give them. What are your thoughts about whether and how a partner is supposed to navigate that? Oh, so if I had a partner for those first couple of years, the 1 step forward, 3 steps back stuff is understandable when you think about it from the addict's perspective, but brutal from the partner's perspective. Yeah, I would agree with that. Karen, thoughts?
The question is, how did you make it through that?
Well, the question is, let's say, me struggling through my first several years
Sure.
of recovery, I had a partner. How does the partner deal with me struggling? I did not, by the way.
Very,
So
very carefully. No. Um, the best answer I can tell you is that there are meetings, online meetings like this. There are phone call sessions. There are therapists. There are groups for partners, spouses, couples, different things, whatever. There are partners to learn how to help themselves adjust and modify and deal with their own feelings coming up. If I watched you struggling and you're trying really hard, it still doesn't mean that I'm not mad at you. It still doesn't mean that you didn't hurt me to the core. And I may still be going through my own stuff, but I really believe for partners and spouses, it's so important to give yourself the gift of receiving support, even if you don't want anybody to know. There's a lot of people you can be online with, you can talk to, and they don't know who you are. But please give yourself the gift of support so that when Scott is walking forwards and backwards in his recovery, that you can still be there. You can't rescue him, but you can still be there because you're going to be moving back and forth due to the harm and the betrayal that you've had. So that's what I recommend for spouses and partners.
yeah, I think that sums it up beautifully. You just kind of have to keep trudging forward too.
Yeah.
And it's going to be 2 steps forward, sometimes 2.5 back for you too. You're just going to flip out once in a while, and don't beat yourself up for it, and realize it's temporary and it will pass. But yeah, it's no fun. It's no fun for either party, but it's worth it.
People that make it through, and we're fortunate that we hear from so many people that make it through together. Many times will say, if they are in a committed relationship, that it became finally a relationship they had never dreamed of, because the wounds that each person have had, or that the person acting out in their addiction has had, is they've received the help they need to have. So it is like meeting a whole new person, but meeting them at a level in which it's a heart level, and that there's emotions and feelings that are being shared versus, I can't tell you what I'm thinking inside. I can't share love with you. So it's really pretty amazing to see that and hear that. And I've had couples that renew vows, or as a friend of ours refers to, his spouse refers to him as her second husband, and things such as that. So it is a beautiful process, but it's difficult, and there's nothing about it that's easy to get through it.
Yeah. Okay, so I love this next question too. Can you speak about how positive emotions can lead an addict into acting out? I understand negative emotions, but not as clear about positive. And then this questioner says, I felt like I was in a good place with my wife. I felt close to her, yet when we were out together that day, I was acting out by noticing and objectifying. That's been a huge problem in my relationship, and I noticed a few times that I'm prone to this even when I'm feeling positive.
That's still part of the addiction. I do not, and this may not make any sense, as an addict, I don't need to have a feeling or emotion that triggers me to objectify or act out in some way. It can be any feeling or emotion. It could be what you see, what you hear, the smells that are around you that may bring back a memory. You can go into a fantasy of something that just jumps out, a sign or whatever. So I don't think that it's always tied to negative emotions. I think it's associated with any kind of emotion. I can be happy and want to celebrate and party. And that could mean, drinking, drugging, sexing, doing whatever I want to do, or eating. Eating disorders are another whole issue. But I personally don't believe it's just related to negative emotions.
Yeah, positive emotions can be really just as triggering and sometimes more triggering.
Yeah.
I mean, we're all at the office party and it's Christmas and, Sheila from accounting is Xeroxing her butt and, and suddenly we're in the supply closet with, whoever, because we're celebrating and we've had a few coffee, but the other issue, and this was one of the things for me with positive emotions, was I still had a lot of shame. Mm-hmm. So if I was feeling good, I was also feeling bad about feeling good because I didn't think I deserved to be with this wonderful woman who I love and care for. And, so there can be this push-pull dynamic that we're not even aware of until we step way back from it and really get a look at, what's going on in our brains and our hearts. Because, the surface stuff, addicts, we struggle to deal with surface stuff, let alone dig down to what's under it. I had two emotions when I got to recovery, anger and happiness. That was it. I mean, I just couldn't fathom that people had other emotions, and it took me a long time to realize that there are nuances and I can feel two things at once. And, so.
I agree. It's also that shame and guilt comes into play when you look at the person you love and you go, how could I have hurt them? And will they ever really believe me again? So that can take you to the depths of shame. And then maybe they're laughing and smiling at you and you're elated that they really are talking and looking at you. And that can lead to shame. So the shame bucket, as I call it, is it's always best to leave it at the door and not bring it in with you, because it's not something you have to keep carrying around forever.
Yeah, and but it is possible to really truly be feeling good and positive and no shame, nothing going on, and still be triggered. And I'm probably at this point, I deal with the negative stuff better than the positive stuff, because I know when there's negative stuff going on, I need to reach out, I need to talk to somebody, I need to use my tools for recovery. When life is good, I forget to use my tools of recovery, and I'm a lot more likely to get slammed with a trigger. So it's just weird.
That's a huge point to make. That's really important. Thank you that everybody hears that, because we always associate acting out in any way with something bad or something horrible. No, I mean, you can be happy and your brain is still working. The neural pathways are still working that are there. You're just still learning how to adjust and to be in recovery around it. So again, even if you're happy, it's okay to reach out to somebody and go, I'm really happy and I want to act out today. Okay, well, let me see if I can ruin your day. No, I'm teasing. But that's all right too. And every human being is different. So
yeah, that's a really interesting question with
yeah, it is.
tons of answers that maybe we hit on something that will resonate. I hope so.
Now, they're asking extremely amazing questions tonight. It's really different and cool.
They always do.
Yeah.
Okay. I started with AA in 2007. Came to S recovery, that's sexual recovery, in 2015. I picked up meth in 2004 and hit bottom very quickly, but it was too late. The marriage of meth and sex had been established, and I've had only intermittent success with sobriety. When I relapse in my sex program with sex, meth is always in the mix. The consequences have piled up. Why have I failed so miserably after all of these years of serious attention to my recovery? First of all, you haven't failed miserably. You're still coming back. That's a success. Right. Okay, now I'll turn it over to Karen.
No, keep going. You're doing good. This is
You're on, Karen.
This is addiction is addiction is addiction. And people are going to relapse. It's going to happen. Things are going to happen, and I'm going to fall back and say, like in this case, I may act out sexually, or there's meth. Well, you know, as Dr. Fawcett talks about the fusion, the chem-sex fusion of acting out and the chemicals in the brain. If there's one, there's going to be another. You can also look at cross addictions, which says it may be that if somebody starts with alcohol, then they add in a little drug or pot or whatever they want to add to that, even though I know I'm in a state where things are allowed. I may add in eating disorders. We see that all the time that comes up. So it's what, until I have done the work inside myself to change how I feel, and I'm not running away from those memories or feelings that hurt me so bad, I will find anything to become addicted to make me feel different. So if I wanted to, I could become addicted to the chair that Scott is sitting in. Now, it's not going to give me a buzz, but if I decide that's going to make me happy, I can become addicted to that. So recovery doesn't mean it's always going to be exactly the way you want it to be, and you're going to be free, and there's never going to be a relapse or a moment of a slip. Just remember, those things are there, and if one starts, be ready for the other. Reach out as fast as you can, because they don't usually go away.
Yeah, meth and sex can be separate addictions, and they can be the same addiction.
Mm-hmm.
When they pair or fuse into a single addiction,
Mm-hmm.
Recovery is it's just doubly difficult. It really is. I hate to break it to you, but when they pair or fuse, you know, you've got double trouble in terms of triggers. You know, if I'm triggered towards sex, guess what? I also want to use. If I'm triggered toward using, you know, I'm battling that trigger, but I'm also triggered towards sex, and I don't even realize it. And, you know, it's just double trouble on relapse. You know, one of the things, you know, at our Seeking Integrity treatment program in Los Angeles, Karen's there right now, we treat sex addiction, we treat porn addiction, and we treat paired sex and substance addiction, because it needs expert treatment from somebody like Dr. David Fawcett, who designed that part of our program, and Karen, who's been around this stuff forever, and Dr. Rob, who you know, understands this stuff inside and out. If you only treat half the addiction or deal with half the addiction, mm-hmm. you're never going to get and stay sober, because the other half is going to drag you out. And it sounds like you're experiencing some of that. I don't know if you've been through treatment or not, but it's difficult. There is specialized treatment out there. I would look into it if you possibly can.
Right.
You know, but don't beat yourself up for relapse. I mean, ideally, nobody wants to relapse, and it is possible to have long-term recovery even with a fused meth and sex addiction. Right. I know people who've done it and are doing it, and walk the walk and talk the talk, and they're great, and I love them. But it is harder.
Much harder.
Yeah. So let's see. Please elaborate on co-addiction. Hate that term. I'll get into that in a minute. I'm an alcoholic with 2 years of sobriety, but this may be a co-occurring addiction question, not co-addiction.
Okay.
So let's just call it co-occurring addiction. Please elaborate on co-occurring addiction. Don't mind that term at all. I'm an alcoholic with 2 years of sobriety, but my porn use has increased, and it is becoming problematic. It seems more difficult to address even with a 12-step background and an awareness of the issues involved. This sounds like a cross addiction, by the way, but you want to jump on that one, or you want me to take it?
Yeah, that a few minutes ago when I talked about cross addictions, it can also be called co-addictions, which means I may have something that I start on first, something that I choose to use first, that I become addicted to. A lot of times when somebody's working on that and saying, I'm not going to drink anymore, then it's okay, I'll just start using this med, or I'll just start acting out sexually, but you don't say that in your head. Your behaviors just move into another pattern of behavior to make you feel better, to make you feel different, to allow you to step outside of yourself and to sometimes it's not real, but just for the few minutes of it is I feel better. And our thing is just as soon as you feel better, you're going to latch on to it. So what we see many times, they'll call it the whack-a-mole game. As soon as I get the drinking under control, then there goes the sex addiction that pops up. I hit that one down, and there goes the drugs that come up. We have to look at all of those together, much like Scott was talking about the chemsex side. You have to look at all of those together because the underlying reasons, that's what's causing this to happen. It's not just because it's drinking, drugs, sex. The underlying causes is what you want help with. You want to look at to see what is driving me that I have to escape from who I am to be happy. So it's very easy to not even know that you're crossing addictions. I know in my lifetime I've been like, what is everything an addiction? Well, there was a time pretty much, yeah. But it was until understanding you're running away or you're trying to numb out is that you'll find something else to do it with and not even realize it. So that's where help can be there and to help you get through it all.
Yeah, Karen just hit on I think the salient point, which is, addiction is about escape. It's about emotional escape. Sex addiction is not about sex. Sex addiction is about escaping my emotions. Alcoholism is not about, I'm not thirsty. I'm trying to escape my emotions. And that doesn't change just because I stop drinking. I still want to escape my emotions, so I'll go to porn. I was a cross-addicted alcoholic, drug addict, sex addict. I bounced from one to another to the other. I didn't do them I didn't drink and get high at the same time. I didn't drink and have sex at the same time because that doesn't work very well. And I wasn't smoking dope and having sex at the same time because that also doesn't work very well. But I would bounce from one to the other to the other. And it wasn't about the substance or the behavior. It was about escaping. And that's a cross addiction, and that's really what you described here. A co-occurring addiction is an addiction that happens at the same time. I'm using and being sexual. A lot of people have to drink to loosen up enough to be sexual, and they'll develop a co-occurring addiction. If they're drunk, they're also acting out sexually. If they're acting out sexually, they're also drinking, that kind of thing. And what we just talked about with meth and sex.
Exactly.
It's a co-occurring addiction that on steroids when it fuses like that. So I did want to talk about co-addiction, which really is a different term, and it's related to codependency, which is another word that we're not fond of at Seeking Integrity. Women were described as, always women, by the way, wives, were described as co-addicts. Their husband was the one who was drinking and shooting up, but they were a co-addict. And it was really pathologizing the partners of addicts, which was crazy. That's why Rob, several years ago, wrote the Pro-Dependence book, which is, you end up doing this kind of the same work in therapy with pro-dependence as with codependence, but it's not a shaming and blaming. And co-addiction and co-addict, those are really blaming, shaming terms. So when I read that, I went, phew. So that's why I did that.
Yeah, and that's the piece that always used to get me is when somebody said, well, you're a co-addict. No, I love this person and I want them to be okay. And I never could understand when people would say, you're codependent. Well, I'm a mom. I'm going to make sure that my children have what they need to have, maybe before I do, if you're talking about food and clothes and stuff like that. That doesn't make me codependent. It makes me a mom that loves her kids. And so those terms, it was meant to be used in a very different way. But I think so over time, and when it was written, it was great, and it started making sense. But over time, we've realized that just because someone has a sex addiction does not mean that their partner or spouse is a co-sex addict. And that's the term that was used. So I'm really glad Prodependence came out. I personally appreciate what Rob did with that and allowed the people that love the person that is acting in an addictive pattern of behavior that they can understand they can love them and want to help them. And it doesn't mean that they have issues themselves. So.
And by the way, I'm not ripping on Melody Beatty or Pia Melody or any of the other people who started the codependency movement.
Right.
It turned into something they didn't intend, which is a pathology, and they never meant for that to happen. So Rob's actually really going back to the roots of the codependency movement with prodependence, at least I think.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, and I mean, it turned into stuff like, books like Women Who Love Too Much. Oh, can you love too much? Is that possible? Maybe love badly and ineffectively, but too much? Really?
Yeah.
Not a fan of that title. It's not a bad book, by the way.
No.
I hate that title. I'm ranting today. I've heard lots of drop-in groups and webinars and Q&As. I'm confused. I keep hearing that I should get a therapist, which I haven't for mostly financial reasons. Then I have heard it said that until you get some abstinence, you're basically wasting your time with therapy. How am I supposed to deal with this since sobriety seems so elusive for me? This is somebody who's struggling with sobriety. I feel confused. Have you ever heard anybody say you're wasting your time with therapy until you're sober?
No. And when you made that statement, we both did our head like that. I can make that face again if y'all want.
Yeah, nice. It might freeze like that, according to my mom.
If someone, I mean, therapy is not free to most people if you go to see a therapist or things like that. There's a lot of different kinds of therapy, if you will. A 12-step program is, forget the word therapeutic, a 12-step program is amazing for people that are looking for help with an addiction because they're working with other people that have been in recovery that help to support you walk through it to find the other side, to come out of it, and that will not leave you. They won't abandon you while you're doing this. So I have seen many people that have never been in therapy. They can't afford it, they don't believe in it, whatever it is. There's many different types of, it doesn't have to be a 12-step group per se. There's many different organizations that provide support for people in recovery. It's just a different named recovery and things such as that. So if that's what the question is about, is can there be recovery and can there be help without being in therapy? Yes, there can be. I think the people that I'm fortunate enough to work with every single day, like a Scott, this is recovery. It's seeing one another and helping one another always just by talking about it or being in a group. So, yeah, it is there.
Yeah, I'll just give you, again, my personal experience. I was in therapy before I went to 12-step recovery, and there were no webinars back then. They didn't exist. And I'm not sure I would have gotten sober eventually. It did take me a while, as I mentioned, but I'm not sure I would have gotten sober if my therapist was not addiction and recovery focused and hadn't been willing to stick with me. And he understood it well enough to see my progress when I couldn't, and to keep encouraging me and pushing occasionally against my will. But I needed my therapist. But I know plenty of people who've never seen a therapist in their life, and they went into a 12-step meeting and they got sober on their first meeting, and I think they're just weird. But it happens. But yeah, there's 100 different ways you can do it. The only way you're wasting your time in therapy is if you've got a crappy therapist, or if you're not telling your therapist the truth.
There you go. I was going to add that
That's the
one
big
in.
one, because I just
Yeah.
realized I had a couple therapists before the one I just mentioned, and I didn't
Right.
tell them the truth, and they couldn't help me.
It's on the therapist side, they when you want to help so bad, you keep trying to find out more and more and more to help. And I've seen many people that were basically fired from their therapist, so to speak, because, you know, they weren't telling the truth. And if you're not telling your therapist the truth, it's really okay to have the courage enough to call them and tell them, look, I realize I'm not, and I'm scared, and I need help. You know, just be honest with them.
Okay, I think this next question is a follow-up on the question from the betrayed partner about the 2 steps forward, 3 steps back. You know, how do we? This individual says, how do we stay in it? I assume that means the relationship when the ups and downs, by definition, traumatize us. So maybe you can address the fact that the ups and downs and relationship betrayal is trauma, number one,
Right.
and then how to deal with that.
I work with partners and spouses all the time. The first thing that's really important is that someone listen, that someone hears what the betrayed partner or spouse has gone through, that they hear, because many times I will have somebody say, I've said this for years, but he or she's never paid attention to me. So they need someone to hear them, to listen to them, and to really let them have a voice and to begin to talk about the pain that they're going through. That's key. It's got to happen, because then they're opening up. When the anger part comes, what I see a lot of times is partners or spouses will find out something's going on, then they immediately turn it inside themselves to say, what did I do wrong? Was I not good enough? Was I not pretty enough? Was I not smart enough? All the not enoughs. Then it will turn into anger and start coming out everywhere. So it rapidly spins itself. And as soon as there's somebody that can talk and help and support and be there for them, that's where the partner or spouse can begin to see, maybe learn, maybe education is important because they never heard of it. But be assured that just because somebody has done work around being a betrayed spouse or partner, it doesn't mean that there's not underlying trauma. And 3 months from now, all of a sudden, they say, you know, when you did this, this really broke my heart. That's because it did. Then they're telling you the truth. Can people change and can they grow together? Yes. But both people have to seek healing for the pain, one that was passed on to them, and one for the person that's using or has used, and they're acting out in some way to numb out the pain. So I really encourage it, but don't expect things are just going to happen because all of a sudden that you've decided to start recovery. It's not going to change instantly. And again, it's very important. A lot of times the spouses or partners have education around what's really going on, what to expect. I'm not talking disclosure, I'm talking education of why this is happening, what's going on with the other person, and what is it going to look like, and how do I get the help I need to have to continue to support and survive it.
Yeah. Okay, let's go to another one here. My partner, this will probably be our last one here. My partner has an addiction to meth. It causes him to experience erectile dysfunction, but then he seeks out prostitutes and escorts. Is his behavior because of low self-esteem, because of his inability to perform sexually? Does he feel inadequate with me, so he seeks gratification from doing things for other women? A lot packed into that.
I'm not going to say I know that answer. I just know that many times what I hear is going back to that shame and guilt and remorse Scott, is a lot of times there's so much there. Or one, if somebody's been acting out prior to, and then they go home and their spouse or partner's there, and they say that, you know, there's erectile dysfunction that's going on, it's because they've been acting out so much right before, or they're still under the influence of the medication. I've also heard many times that because of the shame and guilt that they have when they come home, is that that whole mindset is not there. How do I have healthy, loving sex, intimate sex with my spouse or partner when I feel so guilty about what I just did? That's not there. Now, you may have something to add, because I know you work with a lot of people, but that's what I hear a lot of times. And it doesn't matter the age.
Yeah. First of all, meth creates erectile dysfunction. It just does. That is a common side effect. Also, heavy porn use often creates erectile dysfunction. So he may be looking at porn too. And you know, what you're describing is, you know, it may not be a paired or fused meth sex addiction, but it sounds like it's probably a co-occurring meth sex addiction. And, you know, meth screws up your judgment. You know, if he wasn't ever using meth, he might never see a prostitute. But then again, he might be a sex addict who would see a prostitute anyway. You know, without really digging deeply into this, there's no way to know for sure what's going on. There she goes. But yeah, I mean, it's, you know, underlying any addiction is shame, which is low self-esteem, which is, you know, not good enough. And you know, a lot of sex addicts, and this sounds horrible, but especially male sex addicts, paying for sex gives us power that we feel like we don't have, because we have low self-esteem and shame, and especially sexual shame. So paying for it, strip clubs, prostitutes, things like that, is part of the arousal. You know, there's just so many things that we could spend a whole webinar just on this question probably. I would suggest tune back in next week and ask this question again, because Dr. Fawcett will be here, and I think he'll have insight into this that Karen and I probably don't.
And it will give him a whole week to think about it before he answers that. So there you go.
Yeah, we are out of time. Thank you, everybody, for being here. Thank you, Karen, so much for filling in for Dr. Fawcett. Always love when you're here. Anything you want to say to take us out?
Everyone be safe. Look for happiness tomorrow and gratitude.
Thank you. We apologize we didn't get to all the questions, but we got to quite a few of them. There's a lot of people here today, which is great. So thank you all for being here. Dave will be back next week, and we'll see you then.
There you go. And Dr. Fawcett will have an answer.
We had an answer. I just don't know that we had as good a one as he'll have. We did our best.
See ya. Bye.
All right, everybody.